All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Gumtree of Liberty podcast, episode number 10. I'm joined today by Paul, one of our contributors, to revisit a few topics that we've discussed in the past. So, episode 6 of the live stream, we spoke about libertarianism and Christianity, and I wanted to revisit that in the light of it being Easter. In fact, this is being released on Easter Sunday. So I wanted to start off with talking about the idea that libertarians don't care about the poor, because I was actually talking with someone in Australia today, and they said to me, they basically said libertarians don't care about the poor. They're rich capitalists who only care about themselves and the middle class and the upper class. And I thought that framing that in a Christian light does, highlight the need to care about the poor, even though it's not necessarily a welfare state. As an anarchist, I despise the welfare state. But there still is a way to support the poor and the minority communities. I think one way to look at it is the Beatitudes. It says those who inherit the earth are meek. It emphasizes the need to reach out to the poor and to whoever you supported the least of these, you supported me. That sort of thing. That idea that if you help anyone, it's still it doesn't matter who they are, you should still look after them and support them. And of course, we all know that Jesus met with beggars and tax collectors and the like. He hung out with them as opposed to hanging out with the Pharisees. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that, Paul, to maybe start us off. Your thoughts on Christianity and the poor and libertarianism.
Sure. Well, it's always great to be on Gumtree of Liberty. Good times here. Howdy from Texas, by the way. Yeah, this is one of the things that really surprises me about people who look at what government does and think, well, first of all, that this is how you help the poor. When it's sort of like if you're taking care of someone sick. I'm not saying being poor and being sick, but follow the analogy here. If someone is sick and rather than healing whatever is wrong with them, you just sort of make it so they don't die. Like, yeah, you could make them better, but we're just going to keep this in the state of sickness. And government really has absolutely no desire to make people not poor. It's a very large voting block for them. And I know here in America, we have a pretty strong welfare state here, and it's never built on something that's helping people have self-dignity, self-worth. So obviously, as a Christian, I believe in the Imago Dei. I believe we are created in the image of God, and the Bible has a lot to say about how we treat poor people, those who are less fortunate than ourselves. If you've been blessed with wealth, income, with something. I mean, even in Scripture, you see people who are very, very poor, but they share what meager possessions they have. So I think the first thing it's important from a Christian perspective, it doesn't always sound great politically, but from a Christian perspective, you should always remember we're always going to have the poor. The Bible says the poor you have with you always. So thinking that you can put on your magic John Lennon Imagine glasses and no more sickness, no more pain, no more poor, that's unrealistic, and I don't think that that's a goal you should have. But I think that as Christians, we are called to help those less fortunate, specifically the fatherless, the widows. All of that was intended for Christians to handle, and mainly in their own community. Now, the government, at least here in America, I don't know how it is in Australia, but a lot of times the government steps in, and not only are you not allowed to help the poor, or they take your taxes so you can't help the poor as much, especially in your own community. Many cities, especially some of the bluer cities, have laws where some great mechanisms to feed the poor, feed the homeless, take care of them, are now outlawed. There is a story, I guess this was 3 years ago, famously, Chick-fil-A was going to open up a restaurant in downtown Manhattan, or I believe right on Times Square. And whenever a Chick-fil-A opens, whoever is the first customer, you get free Chick-fil-A for a year. And some people were complaining, oh, you're going to give this to some privileged something or other. And they said, we could give it to anybody. Choose a homeless person. We'll give a homeless person free food for a year. And the government came in and said, no, 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 you can't do that. You can't give homeless people free food for a year. They have to control what their intake is. Anybody who wants to feed the poor has to go through government, government requirements. There are a lot of restaurants that would like to donate leftover food that they can't, the next day it's going to be bad, or it's going to be out of a date where they can not safely serve it, but it's beyond what law allows them to serve to the customers. And so that evening, instead of throwing it in the trash, it's still good food, it's still fine, it's still nutritious. They have to throw it in the trash. They cannot give it to them. So this whole concept that libertarians, because we don't want government involvement, somehow we hate the poor, I believe it's exactly the opposite, where we do feel sorry for the poor. We do want to help them, but the difference is we want to help them past this perpetual state of poorness, get them a job, get them so that they are self-supporting, get them so that they have dignity, so that there is a self-worth. We're not interested in putting them on programs where they are perpetually in a state of handout, but that they can provide for themselves, that they can provide for their family, and all of a sudden they begin to value themselves and become productive members of society. I would say in that regard, libertarianism as a political philosophy cares for the poor in a much deeper way than the government does. Obviously, as a Christian, we take care of the poor because they are made in the image of God, just like us. God has given us a lot. He has blessed us with something. And so contributing to charitable organizations that we can check out to make sure that they're spending the money on the right thing, that there's not waste, abuse, or giving it directly to them. If we happen to know of a family, oftentimes in our church culture here, if a family is going through a tough time, however it might be, the church really gathers around them. I'm part of a group at my church that whenever there's a need in the church, then the word goes out and we sign up to take meals. We sign up, we give to a fund in our church that people can use the money if they need to pay bills, if they need to do something. But they're part of our community. We know them. They don't necessarily have to be part of our church, but we know where it's going, rather than the nameless, faceless government who will spend it on anything and everything. How much of our dollar in taxes that's earmarked for the poor actually goes to the poor? I would wager very, very little. So in that case, people who say libertarians don't care about the poor know nothing about libertarian philosophy. And certainly those who would accuse Christians of not caring about the poor, either they've gone to a bad church experience or they have not been exposed to true Christianity, which God says is this: to visit the fatherless and the widow in their affliction. That meeting basic needs is the crux, ground floor of being Christ-like.
I think for me, and I like your point as well, that there will always be the poor. And there's a verse in Deuteronomy that says that if anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Rather be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need. And I like that. That's Deuteronomy 15:7-8. And it talks about, you doing it, not getting the state to take your taxes and do it for you. It talks about you taking responsibility for the poor and helping them out of your own pocket, out of your own free will. And I want to compare that with 1 Samuel 8, which is a chapter that I always come back to whenever someone says to me, with the church and people in church says, there's the government is mandated by God. I always go back to 1 Samuel 8, and it's interesting because I know that there's a church that I used to go to in Toowoomba, that they're now talking about, okay, we need to look at the COVID laws, then we need to say, are these consistent with Scripture? Or is there government-made restrictions? Are they inconsistent with the Bible? In which case, we have a duty to disobey them. But the problem is that they're still think that the government still has that mandate from God. So I go back to 1 Samuel 8, especially verses 10 to 18. And it's basically God saying to Samuel, this is what a king would do for you. Reading from verses 12 and 13. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and others to plough his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war, equipment for his chariots. He took his daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. And I think that's very interesting comparing that to Deuteronomy. Because it basically says the government will take this and it'll take that, whereas Deuteronomy says give. Mm-hmm. Give out of your own will rather than giving to the state taking it from you and then using it themselves.
Yeah, it's a really interesting juxtaposition there, because in Deuteronomy, God is setting up, technically they're a theocracy if you want to get all technical, but realistically, the people of Israel at that time were going to be living in an anarchist society. There was no king. There was leadership in that there was spiritual leadership with the priesthood, but they were not a government function. That was to make sure that the spiritual well-being of the tribes were kept up. Everything else was to be a voluntary, you're voluntarily in this society. And it's interesting that God said, if you want this society to work, here, Deuteronomy is filled with a lot of things, and some of them are very specific to that time and that people. I get that. And in my religion, my religion, Christian, Protestant, I'm Reformed, and so famously we have our tulip acrostic, and the first one, T, the total depravity of man, and ultimately man just can't help themselves. They're going to sin, and they're going to make idols in their hearts, as Calvin said, our hearts are idol factories. And as the children of Israel got worse and worse and worse, what was it that they were clamoring for? They were clamoring for the government. And God warned them, like you read, they're going to make you go to war. They're going to steal your stuff. They're going to take that money that you should have used to help the poor, and they're going to use it to kill other people for unjust reasons. And interestingly enough, it was an agrarian society, so there were even rules in there when you're going out to harvest. We read about this in Ruth very clearly, where the fields, whenever you come to a corner, rather than going straight to the corner and then cutting over as you're harvesting the field, you were to make like a curved swath so that all the corners were left behind. Still growing. And if you dropped corn or wheat or whatever it was that you were harvesting, if you dropped it, you were not supposed to bend down and pick it up. You left it there. And then the poor were able to come behind free of charge, and they were able to get all of these, they were able to get the wheat and the corn, and that was how they made it. So for the poor person, it was not a lay back and get it type society. They did have to work for it, but there was a way for them to work for it. They could turn around whatever excess there was. I'm sure they could sell it. There were ways for them to work their way out of poverty. And I think that's a beautiful and absolutely beautiful way for a society to work together, that I've got an abundance here. I'm going to leave it for the poor. Like, I'm going to leave it for those in my community that I know need help. And God will bless. He certainly blessed Boaz in that instance, as he followed the rules and helped care for the poor.
That reminds me actually of a story I heard about the leaving the corners. Is that compared to the Canaanites, for example, they did the same thing, but except they left that as a sacrifice to the gods, whereas for the Jews, for the Israelites, they left it for other people to actually take for themselves.
Yeah, they left it because their God told them to do it. So, and I mean, that is a large difference you'll find with the true paganism, is you do leave it for the God. It's God's at peril of the human, and our God in his infinite grace and love commands us to esteem others better than ourselves. So he, you know, in a very real sense, his own incarnate appearance, death, and resurrection was caring for humanity. And that's what he calls us to do, is to care for one another in our community specifically, and then obviously around the world as we travel and spread the news of the gospel. But yeah, and that's one of the reasons I think libertarianism and Christianity fit so beautifully hand in hand, is we in libertarianism, we view the individual. You are an individual, and because you are an individual, you have worth. No one can aggress on you. They can't hurt you. They can't take your stuff. Really, for the basic reason that you are a human and you deserve human treatment because of it. Now, I will say this for anyone who's listening and is not a libertarian, or they find maybe you're socialist, whatever political spectrum you're on, whatever country you are, whatever your country is, the work of the gospel and the cause of Christ supersedes politics. And so it's not like only people who live in a democracy can really truly worship Christ. Obviously, the world is tainted by sin, but God wrote the Bible, or God inspired the Bible about himself to people who lived in every conceivable political environment. And yeah, so heaven, Christ is eternal. So no matter where it is that you live, it's not that the Bible is only applicable to libertarians. Lord, I imagine most of them are not even on that page. But yeah, you're capable of following Christ no matter what country you live in.
I'm reminded of the phrase, God loves a cheerful giver.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's all about being voluntary, which is exactly what libertarians love, voluntarism.
Yeah, and I think I don't know, Lord, I believe that comes from Philippians, or that, in my translation, it's not exactly that, but we grew up singing a song about that in there. And in fact, famously in the 1 Corinthians passage about love, 1 Corinthians 13, where you can do all of this stuff, but if it's not done out of love, it's as a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. It's basically useless at that point. And so as Christians, we are not only called to give, but we are called to give joyfully and with love. And I think that really solidifies, it's no longer us saying, well, if I do this, then perhaps God will like me more. You can't do anything to make God like you more. You can't do anything to make God love you less. He loves you as much as you can be loved, and he does so perfectly. But we are called to give, and to give joyfully, and to give out of love.
And of course, when you give your money to the state to distribute on your behalf, you're less likely to be as cheerful as when you do it out of when you go out and you say, I like what this group's doing, I'm going to donate to them to help them help the poor. So you get more saying what your money is spent on, and of course that makes you happier than the government taking your money for administration purposes in reality. Yes,
so that's one of those interesting things. I've had this conversation with many a Christian, especially in the Baptist world here. I'm not sure about over there. In the Baptist world here, they do love to quote them some Romans and Corinthians about rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar. And it's a gross interpretation of that whole text. We are not required to give our money cheerfully to the state. The state is not God. The state stands in antithesis to God. There is no king but Christ. And I imagine if you marched down to your local government and you said, there is no king but Christ, they might not be too happy about that, especially if it begins challenging that power. Of my own personal belief, in America, it's a little bit different, because we as the citizen, we are in charge. We have public servants. The president is the first servant, that, an official title of his. Now, not a whole ton of people are living like that, but that is the reality of our Constitution. They do represent us. And, you know, if I hired someone to be a PR firm, you know, to do PR for my music business, and they went out and was spreading hate, or even worse yet, pop music, if they were not representing me well, I'm going to fire them. I'm no longer going to give them my money because they are not representing what it is that I want. I feel that in the same way about the state. I don't like the fact that my money is going to be spent, or is being spent, on killing people across the seas for whatever reason, you know, not good reason. That is not what they're there for. And, you know, in essence, they forfeit the right to whatever it is that they thought they had a right to begin with. They have no right to my money, and I am under no compunction to give it to them, especially if they're going to use it for nefarious purposes. I don't think anyone would look back at the German and Nazi Germany and say, oh my goodness, you didn't pay your taxes to Hitler? You're a terrible person for not paying your taxes. I think they would be seen as somewhat of a hero for standing up to power, saying, no, what you're doing with this money is morally wrong. It's gross. It's disgusting. And I think history will look back on this time, and they're going to ask the question, why were you spending your money on bombs when you have someone next door that's starving? And it's a good question. And I think libertarians want to take the money away from the government so that it cannot spend it on bombing other countries, and that would leave us to voluntarily help those around us who are in need.
You're talking about the president being the first servant. Reminds me of Nehru, the first prime minister of India, made the exact same comment, that the prime minister is the first servant. Prime meaning first, and that reminds me exactly of that. But yes, I love that you bringing up Hitler. Reminds me of the few debates I've had with other people, other Christians, about, okay, where do we draw the line at what, you know, what's acceptable from the state? Because if you start saying, well, okay, you know, I wouldn't obey if it's Hitler, well, then you start saying, okay, well, where do you draw the line at when you wouldn't and when you would obey? Because then you start saying, well, there's different things in the Bible that you can interpret differently to say, okay, I support the state in this case, but not this case, in this case, but not this case. And you start having to really try and draw a line somewhere. So I think it's easier to just say, work on the presumption that all instructions from the state are against God's will, and then work forward from there.
Well, certainly. And if you read that Romans passage that everyone stops, you know, halfway through, and they're saying, aha, render unto Caesar as Caesar, and, you know, obey the government. There was a list of qualifications there. If you read earlier in the context of that, there's a list of qualifications for what kind of government that it would be good to support if you find yourself part of it. And that government would be punishing evil, you know, punishing wrongdoing. The rest of it's escaping me right now. Basically, anything that is supporting a Judeo-Christian ethic where the human life is valued, where you are not stealing from people, you're not hurting them. A government that supports that, I think people would voluntarily be a part of. I'm like a hop, skip, and a jump away from being full-on anarchist, especially seeing what my money is being spent on now. I like to call myself an optimistic anarchist. I'm getting involved in my political party. Just at a meeting tonight, hence my t-shirt. Because it's the only venue I have right now. It's the best venue available for making some kind of a difference. Because the government I want is one that is not going to hurt people. It's not going to take their stuff. To quote the Nap, that I would voluntarily support. But as soon as you start hurting people, as soon as you start taking their stuff, you're not into a sense of fair play. All of these other atrocities, especially the murder and the rampant wickedness that goes on, well, that's a government that like you don't want to support, and it does not fit the criteria of that Romans 12 chapter, Romans 12 list.
Yeah, I think that's a great point as well. It's interesting watching so many people, having to start to question, okay, what's the money really being spent on? Because we've got all these foreign wars now. The endless foreign wars since Iraq. People starting to question, okay, why is my money being spent on war if I'm a pacifist? Because as Christians, we're called to not be violent. Mm-hmm. And then you start saying, well, okay, I'm a pacifist, but my money is being spent on a foreign war. Does that mean I'm actually fighting a war?
Yeah. So a year ago, I guess a year and a half ago, I forget how long ago it was now, I worked for a year up in Indiana. I was working at a theater, and we were in Amish country. The Amish are pacifists by their religion. If you hit them, technically, they're not going to hit you back. They are extreme pacifists to that level. They do not pay taxes. And this was something that they fought. They fought this years ago, and now, they're very industrious people. They bring in a lot of money. There's also a lot of tourism surrounding them. So the government sort of leaves them alone. They drive horses, or horse and buggy. So they're like, we're not going to pay for the roads. We're not using the roads. Also, yeah, no, we're not going to pay for wars. We are pacifists. And this is what they used going forward. They won that fight. They fought it, and good on them. I mean, they fought it. But I'm sitting here going, well, I mean, it's just as much a part of my religion that you shouldn't you shouldn't murder someone. And yet I don't know that anyone would look at the Amish and say, well, you're not really following Romans 13. No, they had a conviction, they fought for it, and now they're reaping the benefits of standing up for what they believed in early on.
Okay, well, I've got a question for you then, because you probably understand this better than I do. Reading from Romans 13, verse 4, for the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. How do you reconcile that with thou shalt not kill?
And
murder.
So there's a difference between thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not kill. The thou shalt not kill, there's actually a time for death. The Bible does prescribe, death for certain crimes. So there are, and it typically is when now I've got to go back to all my Old Testament classes. I believe it's when a person's humanity is violated egregiously. Rape, the offending rapist was stoned to death. Murder, there was a retribution, a potential retribution. The families got to decide largely what happened for it. And in this case, yeah, the Romans 13 thing where this list, resist what God has appointed, and those who resist incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Okay, so are our rulers a terror to good conduct, to bad conduct? No. So this authority that bears the sword, they've got to be a terror to bad conduct, not good. Ours is kind of, now in some cases, we do have some laws, at least here in America, there are some laws where bad conduct, you can't kill someone. If you kill someone, they're going to hunt you down, they're going to put you in jail. I'm fine with that. You shouldn't kill. Theft, in certain cases, theft is tried and it's punished. And those, yes, I will support wrongdoing being punished. Do I think government is the best way to get that done? No, I think it's the most clunky, horrible way to get that done. But I find myself in a situation where that is what it is. So I will applaud when they do something good. But let's just talk about theft. Yeah, the pay scale for our senators and representatives, 100 and some thousand, 200 if you've been there for a little while. All of our top senators are worth several million. There's a lot of theft going on. They're stealing our money, they're stealing our stuff, and they're spending it on things they're not supposed to. That's a government that, no, they do bear the sword in vain. We are called to stand against that. That was a long answer to your question. Sorry.
When it comes to punishments, I guess as well, if you go back to the Old Testament, it was meant to be community. Mm-hmm. You know, the victim throws the first stone, and the other stones are thrown by the elders and the rest of the community.
Yes.
I mean, Saul held the coat to people who were doing that, but it shows that it wasn't just, you know, the one government employee killing them. It was the community was getting involved in the punishment.
Sure. And by the time Saul was holding, who later became Paul, on the Damascus Road, when they were stoning Stephen, by that point they had already gotten to a place where the church leadership of the Jewish community was in bed with the Roman government, and they had some, you know, deals worked out with each other. But basically, that if you were in church leadership, you also had political power there. So there was a separation that God intended to be with the church that they broke, and the abuses that happened early on. Very few sins were capital. Very, very few. And even some of them, like on accidental death, there was a way for you to escape. There were safe cities for you. The Bible is very big on retributional punishment and not punitive. So in America, we have very punitive. You do something wrong, you go to prison. You don't have to pay it back. You don't have to make it wrong. And they say, oh, you're paying your debt to society. Well, you didn't sin against society, if you will. You sinned against an individual. You broke something, you stole something from them, you hurt them. And that person, there's no chance for forgiveness, and then there's no chance for the wrongdoer to make right what they did. They just get locked up. It's a horrific form of law and order. And I think I definitely believe the Bible has it right, where if you wronged someone, you have to make it up to that person, out of your own treasure, out of your own work, and until you make it right. And then consequently, the person who is sinned against also has the ability to forgive as well. And you know, showing grace that's the crux of Christianity right there.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a good point. Turning back to the idea of Easter again, I guess, with the idea of talking about voluntarism, for example, the idea that Jesus came to save everyone. Well, that's, you know, the idea that we can't, you know, it's someone else has to do that for us. We can't do that ourselves. A lot of other religions, it's about what you do for yourself. And libertarianism is also about what you do doing for yourself, taking responsibility for your own actions. So how do you reconcile that with the idea that humans are also imperfect and need that other help from Jesus, I guess?
Well, one, libertarianism is my political philosophy. It is not my religious philosophy. My religious philosophy supersedes it. You know, point a gun to my head. What do you choose, libertarianism or Christianity? I'm going to choose Christianity every time. Christianity so libertarianism is basically what can't happen to you in sort of what you're allowed to do, what you can do. What Christianity does is it says, yes, here's what you can't do, here's what you can do, but here's what you should do. And that's the big difference, where yes, libertarianism is not, they support moral behavior. If you really dig down deep where that moral behavior comes from, And I have several friends who are atheists, and we have great conversations about where moral law comes from. That can fill up an entire podcast. But I really believe that moral law comes from Christ, and it comes from Judeo-Christianity, where, yes, you are free to just exist, but to be truly fulfilled, to be truly happy, to reflect Christ, is to go beyond that, to visit the fatherless and the widow in their affliction, to feed the poor, to clothe the naked. That's the extra, and that's what makes a community really work. Yes, people think that in an anarchist society, everyone would live on their 5 acres of land, and the minute you step off, someone's going to shoot you because, you're on their private property. Not the case. Not the case. Anarchists are some of the most friendly, communal, giving people I've ever known. And that's because they have this innate understanding that while they are individual, they're also part of a community. The difference is we want to choose what community we're in. And that's what the state does, is it takes away our choice of what community we're in and what communities we serve.
I don't know if you've heard the quote, but I love it. It's that Jesus isn't a libertarian, but he's happy that you are. The idea that no human ideology can perfectly represent what Jesus, because it's human, it's flawed.
Yes.
So there are, of course, and I think that's probably one of the best things about being a Christian libertarian is people can say to you, oh, well, true anarchy's never been tried, or true insert X never been tried in reality. So the idea that, well, it's flawed. It's being implemented and designed by humans. It's going to be flawed. It's going to have problems. You can recognize that. Like, for example, I used to be a strict ANCAP, but now I'm more just an anarchist because having done research on more traditional indigenous ways to live, where they didn't have private property, it was more communal, but it still worked. The idea that no ideology is perfect, it can still be improved upon, except it's here for humans. There's any limit to how far you can improve it. So you do have to rely on God to have that perfect approach. And all ideologies borrow from that to an extent. He's just a socialist. Well, he supported the poor, which is a socialist thing, but it's also a libertarian thing. So he's taking different parts of Jesus for each ideology to try and justify what you believe. But I like the point that you made that your religion comes before your politics.
Yes, very much so. In fact, one of the things I love about my church is we will not have an American flag on stage. There is no talk of patriotism. We don't salute anything. And coming from a denomination that every 4th of July, Uncle Sam barfed all over our auditorium. We had bands and it was just a big to-do. 4th of July, I'm proud to be an American and all that jazz. And I asked him, I said, why don't we have the flag out there? Like, we never really talk about it. And he said, why would we? Said, politics is very temporal, and we are not concerned with the temporal here. We're concerned with the eternal. And obviously there are temporal needs that we meet, but we meet those needs because ultimately we want that person to have an eternal life in Christ afterwards. And that impacted me a lot. And even as I get more and more involved in my political party, and my pastor and I have some really great conversations, and he knows my involvement, and we talk politics not during church, but on our own. And it's just nice to keep those separate, because ultimately I'm going to stand next to a communist in heaven, someone who grew up in communist Russia, but is a Christian. And, we may have had very different political beliefs, but ultimately it was the grace of God that gave us the faith to accept him. And God is not limited by political ideology.
Was it Jefferson who said that separation of church and state exists to protect the church from the state? Was that what him who said that?
I don't know. I was a history minor in college, and I know very little about history. I didn't actually enjoy this subject. It sounds like something Jefferson could have said. I know that the whole concept of separation of church and state gets twisted a lot in our media now, but the original intent of it was this: the state was never supposed to have a church that they, like an established state church. When America was first, people began moving to America, Maryland was a Catholic state and Pennsylvania was a Protestant. Like every state kind of had its own religion. And there's even things about a Protestant going into Maryland and being killed because he wasn't Catholic, and they wouldn't trade with the other ones. That died very quickly. And as the federal government was formed, the whole thing was they were not going to repeat the mistake of Britain that had Anglican Church or the Catholic Church, or depending on if you're Henry or Elizabeth or Mary Queen of Scots, the church was supposed to be separate, because church is where you go when you're vulnerable. Like you're going there when you need to be fixed. And the state will only prey on vulnerability. So
yeah, I love it how people talk about the Puritans in the UK, the Puritans being so extreme, and banning Christmas, for example, and then you compare that to the US, where the Puritans are responsible for the fact that there's religious tolerance. Very, very different conceptions there of what it means to be a Puritan.
I'm telling you, Puritans are absolutely great. I did a paper on them, a specific sect of the Puritans, when I was in college. They were responsible for a lot of really great music, the Moravians, in America. There was even a story of a wife who took her husband before the Puritan Council because her husband was not practicing his husbandly prerogatives enough. And they stuck him in jail for 3 days. And once he was out, they said, buddy, you gotta step up. And so he went to jail because he was not having sex with his wife enough. So the Puritans were by no means they were not the prudish people we think them to be. They were just very concerned with idolatry. They come from a Reformed background, and they were very concerned about having a secularism invading their religion. And so they, when they formed their communities, that's what they were vigilant of. But yeah, by no means were they prudish. They loved their drink.
So where does that tolerance of different religions come from the US? This is a question more of history than anything else, because I'm more familiar with the European side of things, where it was very, very divisive. And if there's any Christianity in Europe used to be what libertarianism is in the US now, is that if there's any minor issue, you split over it and have a massive fight.
Yeah.
So what is that tolerance in the US?
I think the tolerance of it, one, comes from an old tradition of we don't fight religious wars anymore. At least, the American tradition has not necessarily been about tradition. They tried to make the original Gulf War and everything. There was religious overtones about it, and Sean Hannity was telling us, the Muslims are coming for you. They're going to get you. And by and large, that didn't really take hold on the majority of America. But I think the tolerance comes from you can't force someone to be saved. You can't force someone into your religion. And so over time, as we became more secular, people became less Christian. They were growing up in churches that were more interested in growing a big youth group than they were actually teaching you about the gospel and administering the sacraments every week. And so it got to a point where, and I would say even the grand majority of our churchgoers have no clue what Christianity actually stands for. And so when you don't really stand for anything, it is a little bit easier to be tolerant of other religions, because you don't even know what's different about them, and other than you dress differently and maybe you sing different songs.
Yeah, yeah. I want to return back briefly to the Beatitudes and also to the least of these speech, because Matthew 25:40, the king said, "Truly I tell you that whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." And I wanted to get your thoughts on the idea that, I guess I think the best way to phrase it, the idea that it means honoring all people regardless of what you think about them as a person or as an ideology, or whatever you think about the politics, the idea that you still must honor all human beings.
Yes, so a lot of that is going to depend, obviously, so from a Christian standpoint, yes, you honor people because they are created in the image of God. That does not mean that you have to necessarily encourage lifestyle, especially if you see it as dangerous to them. When you're raising children and you see them doing something very dangerous, they're poking a knife into the electrical outlet. Stopping them from doing that is not squelching their personal liberty. It's stopping them from doing something that's going to harm them or potentially could be deadly to them. So it's okay, if your motivation is love, like you see in Corinthians 13, and we can connect to those two passages, the Matthew 25, as well as when your motivation is love, it's not a sense of moral superiority. Hey, you shouldn't be living like that. That is antithetical to Scripture. It's not, well, I'm better than you and I'm going to let you know it. When your motivation is love, honestly, it is because you want the best for them, and the best for them is to live a life where they honor and glorify God. So, in essence, honor can come out in a lot of different ways. Most people, when they say, "Oh, well, you should honor everybody," kind of means, in a colloquial sense, giving them a free pass on whatever it is that they're doing. And this is not the case biblically. This is not the case biblically. Sometimes confronting them about their behavior is more honorable than letting them continue to their own destruction. Now, obviously, they've got a choice. Libertarian philosophy would support this as well. You can approach someone and say, hey, probably not a good idea to inject heroin into your eyeballs. They're free to do it because it's their body, they have agency. But the reason you approach them and say you shouldn't do this is more kind than saying, you're an individual, go for it. You shouldn't support that behavior. You should be against it, if that makes sense.
The reason I ask that is because my next question is around the idea of Jesus sitting with the tax collectors, with the poor, with the downtrodden in society, comparing that to he refused to do anything with the Pharisees, really, and how that exactly lines up with that idea that you meant to be respecting all people, because at the same time he didn't show much. You could say he didn't show much respect for the Pharisees or what they believed. He was very, very much opposed to what they stood for. So the idea that I guess he sits with the poor because he said that they needed saving, whereas the Pharisees felt that they already were saved by their own actions, and tying that back into my earlier point about being saved by your own actions versus needing someone else to help save you.
Yeah, so in the case of Pharisees, now God did meet with some Pharisees. We have the rich young ruler who was also a Pharisee, Nicodemus, met with him. But the difference between the Pharisees and the tax collectors, the poor that Jesus was meeting with, the Pharisees were speaking in Jesus' name. They were claiming the name of Yahweh, and they had created a whole bunch of rules that were not in keeping with what God had revealed to them about themselves, and they were using it for their own purposeful gain. Most of the interactions we have with the Pharisees and Christ or with Jesus on the earth, they're trying to trip him up. They're trying to, get him to say something. They go, aha. And of course, Jesus masterfully handles them by turning their own philosophy back on them. When you come to the tax collector, I think it's very interesting. Matthew, the one who climbed the sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see. I don't know if you guys have that song, but
yes, I remember it.
Yes. So after Matthew's life was changed because of because of the power of Christ in the gospel and what was to come, it's very interesting that the first thing he did was went and gave his money to the poor. Like that was the result of the freedom in Christ when he was set free by the power of the gospel. So that's the difference. Christ was not eating with them just so they could feel good about eating with them. No, he was giving them the word of life that would save their eternal souls. He was not trying to meet a sort of woke quotient. Oh, I'm hanging with so many, poor people. I'm hanging with so many non-Jews. That was not his concern. His concern superseded their nationality. It superseded their job, what they did. We're all sinners. There's no way we can earn our way to heaven. It's given freely, and that's what Christ was doing. The Pharisees, all of them that came to him with an honest motive, he dealt with them, of course, very kindly. But it was the ones who were proclaiming wrong things and using his name, taking his name in vain, if you will. Those are the ones that he dealt with very harshly, as he should, because they were representing him wrongly, much like our state represents us wrongly.
I guess we're coming up on the hour mark. So as a final question, to wrap this all up, how do you think that we as libertarian Christians should approach the idea of supporting the poor? Because we discussed why the state can't do it and why the state shouldn't do it. So how do you think that we should approach that issue?
So dealing with the poor, we're just going to have to get over the fact that the government is taking our money. We don't like it, but they are. Until you're willing to stand up to them and say, no, you can't have it, we are going to have to give even more to our hurt sometimes to care for them. Now, the great part is we belong to churches, and churches can be very charitable organizations, and because there's lots of people with lots of different gifts and a lot of different income levels, as a voluntary group, you can do some marvelous things to help the poor. There's a large church here in the Dallas area that has a free clinic and a pregnancy center. And everyone who comes in can get free health care, and it is entirely supported by the church. The church is the one that started it. And amazingly, there were a lot of Christians in the Metroplex and all around that said, oh, I would have loved to have that. They got on board. They're supporting it financially. There are people who are gifted at organizing. There's a man even in the city that I live in. He's got a homeless shelter, and it's all on his own. There's no city funding that goes into it. And there are several churches that help staff it with volunteers. And these people oftentimes stay around the clock. When it's freezing, they were able to buy blankets and heaters and all kinds of stuff. And, they would pack as many people as they could safely in there with the space they've got. And churches say, okay, well, rather than us open up our own shelter, let's give money to this guy since he's already got the infrastructure. He's already got it there. So that's why I would encourage any libertarian that's serious about helping the poor, get involved with a charitable organization. If you're religious, I'm sure your church would enjoy the extra money to go towards that, or find a group that's doing a good job, that's not wasting the money, and give to them. I'm hoping that at some point in my lifetime I can watch the Federal Reserve burn to the ground and smolder, and all of that money that we get to keep we'll turn around and spend even more of it on the poor. But until then, it's a matter of just digging down deep and giving more beyond what the government takes.
Yes, I speak for everyone when I say we all want to hope that the state dies and the Fed dies within our lifetimes, but unfortunately, it doesn't seem very likely.
Correct, but
we can hope, we can wish.
Exactly, we can hope, and even if they don't die, we're still required as Christians to take care of these functions. And here's the thing: we can do a better job of it than the state can. The more we do it, the more other people will see it. And it's great when you're in a conversation and they say, oh, well, without the state, who's going to pay for the roads? And I can say, you see that shelter right there? That's a private corporation. Yeah. You see that food bank right there? That's run by a church. These hospital systems, Baptist hospital, Methodist hospital, Catholic hospital, Presbyterian, world round, started by churches. So we can do it. We don't need the government's help. And the more we create things like this, the easier it is to make people go, I think I would rather my money go towards helping the poor than bombing brown kids in Syria. And that's how you change hearts and minds.
Right. Is there anything you want to plug before we finish up, Paul?
Yeah. So I wrote a book, Curse of the Rat King, Drosselmeyer, Curse of the Rat King. It is the prequel to the Nutcracker. And yep, there it is. Woohoo! Wow, looks so pretty. You'll have to tell me if the Australian version is any different. Book 2 is going to be coming out this month. I should be getting graphics for it tomorrow, and hopefully I can launch it. It is not a libertarian screed, but it is themes that are very near and dear to me about power differential, and it is Harry Potter meets Jason Bourne. I suggest 13 and older. There is some violence in there, but it is free of schmut and vulgarity, so it should be a fairly safe read. So if you want to go on Amazon and look up Drosselmeyer, Curse of the Rat King, or you can go to thenutcrackertrilogy.com if you want to get updates on all the projects coming out from me.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for joining me for today's show.
It was a pleasure. Anytime.